I'd like to chat with you today about the single most helpful discipleship principle I have learned. And that is not only true of me, that is true of smart people. And one of those is John Ortberg. And he said, I devote this chapter, the topic we'll be talking about, as the single most helpful principle I know regarding spiritual transformation. And it has to do with this question right here we've been talking about. Is Christian living easy or hard? Jesus said, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. But I have found that most Christians have experienced Christian living to be quite hard. And the reason is there is a common perception that Christian living is fundamentally about trying really hard to be good. And there's more to Christian living than trying really hard to be good. And with all due respect to Charles Stanley, there's more to Christian living than simply being filled with the Spirit that we talked about last week. And I have been studying this for several years and discovered that there's about 20 principles by which we are transformed. And the one we'll talk about this week is training. Next week is equally important, by the way. We'll be talking about habit. But it occurs to me there's a danger in trying to oversimplify things. I listened to yesterday an audio, I believe that's called Countdown to 1945, and it's an audio of the first atomic bomb. And if you were to ask those scientists, make it real simple for me. Make it real simple for me. How do you build an atomic bomb? Well, the truth is it's complicated. And the bomb itself is complicated, and figuring out how to get the material is complicated, and how to figure out how to put it in a bomb and the triggering mechanism and then the airplane and how to get it there and how to keep all that a secret. And it's inherently complicated. And there is a danger in trying to oversimplify something, making something more simple than it is. And the truth is, there's a good deal involved in Christian living. Jesus said his yoke was easy, but he didn't say it wasn't a little bit complicated. So let's look at this principle of training. Paul said, do you not know that in a race all runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. What does it mean to run in such a way to get the prize? If you wanted to get a prize in a race, how would you run? Would you simply try really hard, or would you train yourself? Well, Paul said you train yourself. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. That is, they push themselves today and they rest tomorrow, and they push themselves a little more today and they write down what they did and they push themselves a little bit more and a little bit more, and they go into strict training, and they do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly, and we do not pursue discipleship. We do not pursue Christian living as someone who is running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body. Do you ever strike a blow to your body? Do you ever say to yourself, you will not eat that? Do you ever say to yourself, you will get off the couch? Do you say to yourself, I will not watch that show, I will read a book? Do you ever say to yourself, I will go exercise, I will go serve someone? I strike a blow to my body, and I make my body my slave, so that after I preach to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. Paul said it more simply in 1 Timothy 4:7, train yourself to be godly. And Barbara Hughes describes what this means. She says the Apostle Paul links this idea of necessary training or discipline with a spiritual life. 1 Timothy 4:7 says, train yourself to be godly. The word train is derived from the very ancient Greek word from which we get the English word gymnasium. The New Testament times, it referred to exercise and training in general, training and exercise and training, other kinds of training. In a sense, Paul is saying, gymnasticize yourself for the purpose of godliness. He's calling for a spiritual workout. Brian Chappell describes it this way: the call to train yourself to be godly is a highly expressive word. The word train is as translation of the Greek word gumnos, which means naked, and is the word from which we derive the English word gymnasium. In traditional Greek athletic contests, the participants competed without clothing so that their movements would not be hindered. The word train originally carried the literal meaning of to exercise naked, but by New Testament times, it referred to exercise and training in general. But even then, it was and still is the word with the smell of the gym in it, the sweat of a good workout. Gymnasticize, exercise, work out, train yourself for the purpose of godly conveys the feel of what Paul is saying. Run until your feet are like lead, and then choose to sprint. Pump iron until your muscles burn, until another rep is impossible, and then do one more. So let's suppose you wanted to run a marathon and you've never run a marathon and you're middle-aged and you're about 50 pounds overweight and you don't do a little exercise, do hardly any exercise. And I said, go out there and try really hard to run a marathon. You couldn't do it. But what if I said to you, run around the block? Well, you probably could run around the block and you may struggle a little bit, but you could run around the block. And I said, do that every day for the next week and then run around the block twice the next week and 4 times the next week and a quarter mile the next week and a half a mile the next week and a mile the next week and 2 miles the next week and so on. And if you keep that up, in 6 months you might be able to run a marathon. And that's what it means to train yourself to be godly. And you got to ask yourself, how does that apply to Christian living? Well, here's my definition. Training is breaking down a hard task, the hard task of Christian living, the hard task of living a life of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control, the hard task of laying hold of the easy life, the easy yoke that Jesus promised, breaking down a hard task into small but challenging steps, and repeating those steps until those steps are easy, or we might say automatic. John Ortberg says spiritual transformation is not a matter of trying harder, but of training wisely. Respecting the distinction between training and merely trying is the key to transformation in just about every aspect of life. People sometimes think that learning how to play Bach at the keyboard by spending years practicing scales and chord progressions is the hard way. The truth is the other way around. Spending years practicing scales is the easy way to learn to play Bach. Imagine sitting down at a grand piano in front of a packed concert hall and having never practiced a moment in your life. That's the hard way. I like to say it this way. If I ask you to sit down, if you're not a piano player, and I ask you to sit down and play Amazing Grace on the piano, if you've never done it, you couldn't do it. And what if I said, try really hard? Well, trying really hard wouldn't help. What if I said, sit down with a skilled piano player and train yourself? So sit down and play Mary Had a Little Lamb. You can play it on one hand, by the way. And that skilled piano teacher will teach you how to play Mary Had a Little Lamb. You can do it on one hand. You can do it without moving your hand around. And you work that out, and you work out about 10 more simple songs. You come back and you practice those for 30 minutes or an hour a day, and then she gives you some more complicated songs. You get where you move your hands around. You start playing on the black notes. You start playing with 2 hands, and you start playing with 2 notes in this hand and maybe 2 notes in this hand and moving your hands around, and you keep practicing for 30 minutes or an hour a day, and in 5 years you'll be able to play Amazing Grace. And you might say, that sounds like a hard way of learning to play Amazing Grace. And I want to say with John Ortberg, that's not the hard way to learn to play Amazing Grace. That is the easy way. The hard way is sitting down and trying really hard to play Amazing Grace at the piano if you have not trained yourself to do so. Jonathan Morrow says, when we examine the life of Jesus, a surprising pattern emerges. He trained himself to be able to accomplish the mission of the Father. Willpower alone will not produce this kind of life. Willpower alone will not produce this kind of life. Chip Ingram tells a story in both of these audios. It's essentially the same sermon series that he recorded 2 different times. And he talks about the story about his son came to him one day and apparently was somewhat of a devoted Christian. But he came to his dad and he said, Dad, I've just got this one, and he used the King James language, besetting sin. I got this one issue that I've tried and I've tried and I've tried to beat, and I can't beat it. And in a flash of insight, Chip Ingram said to him, all right, son, here's what I want you to do. I'm going to pick you up after school tomorrow, and we're going to go down to the gym. You bring your gym bag to school with you, and we're going to go down to the gym. I'm going to teach you a lesson. And he got down to the gym, and they'd worked out in the garage just enough to know that Chip Ingram knew, the daddy knew exactly how much his son could bench press. And he put that much weight on the bar, and then he put a 5-pound weight on this side and a 5-pound weight on this side, and he lifted the bar on his son's chest, and he said, try really hard. And his son tried and tried and tried, and he said, try harder, try harder, try harder. And finally his son said, Dad, I'm trying as hard as I can. And he picked up the bar and he put it on the stand, and he said to his son, I want you to always remember what you just learned. And then he said to his son, now I want you to imagine that we took this 5-pound plate off this side and this 5-pound plate off this side, and we lifted that bar not one time, but about 6 or 8 or 10 times, as many times as you can. Then we're going to wait a couple of minutes, and then we're going to do it 6 or 8 or 10 more times, and then we're going to wait a few minutes, and we're going to do it 6 or 8 or 10 more times, and then we're going to take tomorrow off, but day after tomorrow we're going to come back and we're going to do that, about 3 reps of that again, and then take Thursday off, and then we're going to come back Friday and we're going to do that again, and then we're going to take the weekend off, and we're going to do it Monday, Wednesday, and Friday of next week, and the next week, and next. And then we're going to put a 2.5 pound weight on each side, and we're going to do that for a little while. And he said to his son, do you think after a month or so, do you think you could lift that what you could not lift now? And he said, well, yeah, Dad, I could. I've seen what my brother did. He couldn't lift 150 pounds, and now he can lift 300 pounds. And his dad looked at him and he said, train yourself to be godly. Take what is difficult now, what is challenging but difficult now, and push yourself to do it, and do it till it becomes automatic. So how does this relate to discipleship? Well, let's look at this verse. James 1:2. I consider this to be the pinnacle of spiritual maturity when you can live this out. Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds. And we know that Paul, in fact, came to live this life. He said, I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. And I've sat in many small groups over the years, and people have looked at this verse and said, yep, boy, that sure sounds hard. I sure can't do that. And my response is, train yourself to be godly. Here's what I want you to pray. I want you to pray, God, give me some little trials in my life. Give me some little inconveniences that I can practice, that I can push against. And God will give you some traffic, perhaps. And when that traffic comes, I want you not to complain and gripe and cry about that and murmur. I want you to train yourself to be godly. I want you to say, thank you, God, for bringing me this traffic today, because this is going to push my ability to rejoice in the Lord always. And I want to think about what's good about this. I want to think about the fact that I had a job to drive to today. I want to think about the fact that I've got a car to drive home in. I want to think about the fact that I've got some worship music and I can turn my car into a worship service. I've got some audio books perhaps and I can listen to. And I want you to think about what's great about this. Perhaps God will bring into your life some bad weather, maybe some really hot weather like we have here in southern Mexico. And I want you to train yourself to be godly. And I want you to say to yourself, what's great about this? Well, I listened to an audio book yesterday. Was talking about how the President of the United States had this meeting with Winston Churchill and some others, and he was talking about how it was just brutally hot where they met at this meeting. And I was thinking to myself, the President of the United States, in my parents' generation, not hundreds of years ago, but in my parents' generation, the President of the United States could not have access to air conditioning, and I do. Even though it's hot outside, I got air conditioning, and we can keep it 72 degrees in my house. Where I live here in New Mexico, I might rejoice in the fact that every night the temperature will drop into the 60s, and I can rejoice in that. And I can say, what's great about this? And if you can't think of anything that is great about this, you might think about this. You might think about the fact that there is coming a day when there will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away, and Jesus has gone to be a prepare a place for us. And Paul said that we consider that our present suffering is not worth comparing to the millions of years we will enjoy in Christ. And when you find something you can rejoice in, even in those inconveniences in life, you will train yourself to be godly. Well, I always close with 4 invitations. The first one is to start your day with your Bible in your lap. I encourage you to use this app here, and you might do a search for a plan. And if you do a search for a plan on training, you might come up with a plan like this, done by the FCA, the heart of a competitor. You're going to find a verse. I would encourage you to take the verse that we've been talking about, train yourself to be godly, and enter it into that Bible memory app and meditate on that every day. One of the best ways to learn to live the Christian life is in the context of a group. And if you're in a group, I would encourage you to check out my lessons, Good Questions, Have Groups Talking. You might check out this lesson series right here, How to Live the Christian Life, and many of the topics that we deal with in this video series are dealt with in this series right here. And then if you live anywhere near me, I live in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and drive up every weekend to just north of Hatch to Salem, New Mexico, and we would love to have you join us as we learn to live the abundant Christian life together.